Hello and welcome. I'm playing with this very fun art supply today. It's called Brusho and it's a version of watercolour. It's actually powdered form. I'm very lucky that I've got this set of 24 and the colours are so vibrant and beautiful. Let me show you this little bit of eye candy here of where I have swatched them all out in my sketchbook. I did that a couple of years ago when I first got this set, and I've painted a couple of my monthly series using these. I'll show you them. Mostly they are series that include water in some format because these splashy effects just kind of beg you to do some sort of watery painting. Well, maybe it's just me. One of the series I painted in Brusho is called Messing About in Boats, because little boats on lovely reflective water is a delightful thing to paint with Brusho, as were rainy day girls under their umbrellas. So much joy. So let me show you how you can use these paints, because there's quite a few different options, but all of them make for some very interesting effects. So the Brusho comes in these tiny little white pots and it's got this tab here so that you could actually open this and take the whole lid off, but it's better not to do that because it's very intense and concentrated and the granules are very fine, so you probably would end up using more than you actually need to. So another idea is to put a hole in the top, and I've seen a lot of clever people put those push pins in, and they leave the push pin in as it's kind of sealing up the hole and it's making this pot into a little shaker. I keep mine in the box, so I don't want the push pins sticking up, then I wouldn't be able to close the lid. So I keep this handy toothpick around, and like when I opened this up and I haven't used it for a while, I had to kind of open this hole here. So that's turned this little container into a kind of shaker. One of the other things I did, you can see, is because they all look the same from the top, I stuck little labels on the top with the colour that's inside, actually using some of the watercolour paint. But that wasn't particularly successful because, as you can see, most of those labels have fallen off. So now I have to read the label on the side, and then I had stuck a second one on the side as well. So it's kind of a bit of a guessing game, but I love them so much, and I probably would get around to sticking the labels back on, but it's more fun playing with them. Let me show you what I mean. So let's choose a rather fun colour here. This is a blue. I believe it's one of the ones that's kind of a composite, because that's the way they've mixed these colours, is to put powder of different colours together. So when you shake it out, you're going to get this unpredictable result. So one of the things you can do is just shake a little bit out, and you can see you can hardly, you think that's nothing, don't you? But look at this. How fun is this? This is just a spray bottle with water. If I can make it work. How exciting is that? Oh, I love it. So you can see what I mean in there, that this blue colour has got some sort of purpley colours and some turquoise colours and even some reds in it. So you're going to get this lovely variation of colour. Now, so that's one way you could do it, is to sprinkle on the dry powder and then spray water. Of course, we could also paint a shape. Let's do a twee little heart shape or something like that. And then I can hardly see where I've made that page wet, but we will find out as I add. Oh, isn't that beautiful? Oh, it makes me so happy. So that's another way to do it. Put the water on first and then sprinkle in. We could also sprinkle the dry paint on and then paint with a brush. Now you see, that's lovely too, but probably one of my least favourite, because the more I move the brush over, the more I'm smushing those different colours together and smoothing out all the variation. So personally, I prefer these exciting, interesting effects. So one of the other things that's very exciting to do is to mix up some of these colours. So we could sprinkle a bit of crimson. What else shall we play with here? What's this? Oh, the orange is very fun because that's another one that's made up of lots of different colours. Now you can see it's quite hard to be accurate, and that is one of the things I love, because it means that you don't know what you're going to get. Oh, happy, happy. Look at that. And then, because it's pretty much watercolour paint, if you wanted to, you could do some of your lifting techniques, any of the techniques that we use for watercolour, we can use here. We could lift out sections with our paper towel. We could do drippy, this sort of thing. Or maybe let's use our big brush. Maybe we go this way. What do you reckon? And you see it just starts behaving more and more like regular watercolour. And in fact, we can turn it into watercolour by using a little palette. And see, if I put a little bit of powder in there, I can mix up essentially watercolour paint. So that's another way to use it. Now it's just regular paint. And of course here I could mix up the various colours. I can make lighter washes by adding more and more water, just like regular watercolour paint. Then I can do a bit of a combination. Oh, pretty. So you see, it's a really fun exercise to just have a bit of a play with this and see what you could come up with. And it's fantastic for watercolour backgrounds, for making cards, for art journaling, all that sort of thing, or just as being regular watercolour paint. Very convenient in these little pots. Why don't we do a little project and see what we can paint just using these amazing colours. I mean, look at that. Does that not make your heart happy? Delightful. What I'm doing here is really just playing to kind of remind myself of the beautiful things that Brusho does and to give me some ideas of what I might like to add to my next painting with it. So I've got a kind of idea of a sort of abstract floral. So I'm putting in very loose blobby shapes, but I'm sort of thinking of petals and big loose blooms. And then once I've dropped that water in, I'm tapping in a little bit of the powder. And you can see on the one on the left, I put in a lot of powder and it gives that big, very red wash. Whereas in the one on the right, there's more of the speckled effect because I've put in slightly less. And that's the kind of thing that you can sometimes do intentionally and sometimes not. And I think that's part of the delight of Brusho. You don't know what you're going to get. Every painting's going to be different, and it kind of teaches you to go with the flow and just work with whatever you end up getting. Now for the background, I'm going to stick with this warm colour palette, I think. I've chosen that orange because it's one of the ones I love, because it's one of those composite colours where you get quite a bit of variation. But there's also a colour called lemon, which is a very vibrant, bright, sunny yellow. And so I'm putting a bit of that in too. And it's hard to kind of remember which one you've got where. And I'm trying to make sure that they're going to kind of blend together. But of course, once I add the water, that's going to be one of the easiest things because they will blend rather effortlessly, just like watercolour does. And I'm using a different technique here. I'm using my brush to apply the water. One of the techniques I haven't used yet is spraying. We'll see if we need to add any of that, because the point here is that I'm really just playing. And if you're looking for a good way to fill your sketchbook or your art journal, this just might be it, because you can do many of these beautiful pages which make a lovely background for a drawing on the top, maybe a line drawing or something like that. And I think that's what I'm going to do, something similar to that for this month's series. So stay tuned for that. That'll be the next video. And I'm treating it like watercolour, and because in fact it is watercolour, once the pigments, those little granules, have made contact with the water, it's basically just turned into paint. So I'm wanting to touch up to those edges, but knowing that wherever the edges of those kind of petal shapes that I made are still damp, there's a chance that the colours are going to run in there. Of course, for something abstract like this, that really doesn't matter. And it means it's quite a good opportunity to practice that, to see what you can control and what you can't control on a piece like this, where it's not going to make much difference one way or another, so you're not going to be too upset if something untoward or something that you're not expecting actually happens. And it's just like painting in watercolour, where if I add extra water, I'm going to get those blooms and cauliflowers and things. And for something like this, it's rather lovely and it adds to the texture. But right now, I'm hoping to get a relatively smooth background around these shapes. I'm also thinking as I do this that it might be quite nice to do some maybe some negative painting in a little while, to see if I can turn those blobs into something that looks a bit more like a petal. But to be honest, if I do that, I'm going to cover up those beautiful wash marks, so I'm not sure. We'll see how we go. I think it's about time I should speed up the video so that you don't get too bored, but as you can see, Brusho is the most wonderful medium to kind of have a bit of a play with, because it really is going to do so many interesting things all on its own. Now you can see I've used this extra technique of using the Brusho as watercolour paint by using my little palette there, and this is where I did decide to do some of that negative painting. So every so often, where I feel like it could be the edge of a petal, I'm creating the edge by painting in the line with fairly concentrated paint, and then softening off one of the edges with a clean damp brush. And because I couldn't resist it, now that I've got a wet patch from wherever I've done that little bit of extra painting, I'm dropping in a bit more, shaking in a little bit more of the Brusho granules direct from the little shaker pot, because I love the texture, that little speckled effect that it creates. And I must say, having done that on those petals, it's making me think that as much as I'm loving the glorious, bright, vibrant colours in that background, that's looking a little bit ordinary, so I could add a little bit more to that. And this is watercolour paint, so if I put water in there, I'm going to get a bloom, and I'm doing that. You can see there's those little bubbles of water that I've left, and I have to be very patient and let those dry. I'm contenting myself with them splattering in the meantime. And this is what it looks like when it's dry. You see those little droplets of water have spread out and pushed the paint underneath out. Thank you for joining me on my Brusho adventure. Happy painting. See you next time.